The moment the giant black wolf hit Molly Whitcomb's porch, every window in her cottage lit up like it recognized a king. Molly dropped her laundry basket, watched 3 towels roll into the mud, and said the first brave thing that came to mind. Nope. The wolf lifted his head. He was bigger than her kitchen table, black as storm clouds over the Blue Ridge, with gold eyes that looked less like an animal's and more like a man judging a very disappointing meeting. Rain ran off his fur in dark sheets. Blackberry thorns clung to his shoulder. One massive paw rested on her welcome mat, which said "Bless this mess," and had never been more accurate. Molly should have called the pack office. She should have locked the door. She should have remembered that an unclaimed Omega living alone at the edge of Blackridge territory did not invite giant wolves inside, especially not during the week the Alpha King had vanished. Instead, the wolf swayed once, stubbornly tried to stay upright, and collapsed across her porch with the offended dignity of someone who considered falling down a personal insult. Molly exhaled. "Great. You're dramatic." The wolf's ear twitched. "Don't give me that look. I've bathed goats with more emotional stability than you." Getting him into the wash shed took 20 minutes, 2 old quilts, half a bag of dog biscuits, and Molly slipping flat on her back in the mud while the wolf stared down at her as if wondering how her species had survived. By the time she filled the wooden tub behind the cottage, her jeans were soaked, her braid had come loose, and the wolf had somehow made himself look like the victim. "You are not dying," she told him, rolling up her sleeves. "You smell like creek water, pine sap, and bad decisions." He bared one tooth. Not a threat, more like a royal complaint. Molly froze when her fingers touched the warm water running through his fur. Her gift woke under her skin, soft and sharp at once. She usually felt simple things from animals: fear, hunger, pain, the cranky despair of Mr. Henson's cat when anyone bought off-brand tuna. But this was different. Under the wolf's soaked coat was pressure, old power, a locked door inside a thunderstorm, and beneath that, a pull in her chest, so sudden she grabbed the edge of the tub. The wolf went still. So did the rain. "What are you?" she whispered. He looked away, too late. Molly pushed wet fur from the side of his neck and found a mark beneath the mud, a black crown cut through by a silver line. The royal brand of Blackridge. Her mouth went dry. Every screen in town had been flashing the same message for 2 days. Alpha King Dorian Blackridge was missing, possibly dead, possibly rogue. Molly stared at the giant wolf sitting in her tub. The wolf stared back. Then he sneezed lavender soap directly into her face. By sunrise, Molly Whitcomb had learned 3 things about the giant black wolf in her wash shed. First, he hated lavender soap. Second, he understood every word she said. Third, he had the table manners of a man raised around servants and the appetite of a garbage disposal with royal opinions. "That is my biscuit," Molly said, standing in the kitchen doorway with one hand on her hip. The wolf, now mostly clean and somehow even larger without the mud, paused with the biscuit halfway between his teeth. His gold eyes slid toward her. Very slowly, with the confidence of someone who had negotiated borders and probably ruined several peace talks, he ate it anyway. Molly stared at him. Unbelievable. His tail moved once against the floorboards. Not a wag. More like a punctuation mark. She had spread 3 quilts near the wood stove because the October rain had turned cold overnight. The wolf ignored the quilts and chose the rug instead, stretching across it until the whole cottage looked like it had been built around him by mistake. Steam rose from the mug of coffee in Molly's hand. Cedar smoke curled against the windows. Outside, the blackberry bushes shivered in the wind. Inside, the royal mark on the wolf's neck sat under a fresh strip of clean cloth, hidden but not forgotten. Molly had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that black crown and silver line. Every time she told herself to call the pack office, the pull in her chest tightened like a hand around a thread. "I am calling you, Bramble," she announced. The wolf's head lifted. His stare went flat. "Because I found you full of blackberry thorns, and because His Royal Highness Mud Paws is too long for everyday use." He made a low sound. Not dangerous. Insulted. Deeply insulted. Molly pointed her spoon at him. "You lost naming rights when you sneezed soap into my face." Someone knocked on the front door. The wolf was on his feet before the second knock landed, silent and enormous, placing himself between Molly and the entryway. The air changed. Not louder. Heavier. Like the cottage had remembered it was sheltering something ancient with teeth. Molly touched his shoulder. Easy. The shock of warmth under her palm ran straight through the mate pole and into her ribs. The wolf went still, but he did not move away. Molly opened the door 3 inches. Deputy Marin Pike stood on the porch in a brown pack enforcement jacket, rain on her baseball cap, eyes sharp enough to cut thread. Morning, Molly. Marin, you hear about the missing Alpha King? Molly kept her face still. Hard not to. Every gas station screen is talking about it. Marin glanced past her shoulder. Folks in town are saying you took in a big black wolf last night. Behind Molly, Bramble gave one soft, offended huff, as if gossip was a lower form of treason. Molly smiled too quickly. Folks in town also said I cursed Mr. Henson's rooster because it stopped crowing. Did you? No. I bribed it with corn. Marin did not smile. High Table has orders out. Any rogue wolf matching that description gets reported. Acting Regent Silas Crow is coming through this county by tonight. At the name Silas Crow, the mug on Molly's side table cracked clean down the middle. No one touched it. Marin heard it. Molly heard it. The wolf did not blink. Molly's fingers tightened on the door. That sounds serious. Marin leaned closer, voice low. Molly, if you are hiding something dangerous, stop being stubborn and tell me. Molly thought of the royal mark. The strange locked pane under wet fur. The way the wolf had stepped between her and the door without being asked. Then Bramble lowered his massive head and pressed his nose lightly against the back of her hand, hidden from Marin's view. Not a command. A choice. Molly looked Deputy Pike in the eye. I am not hiding anything dangerous. The wolf's breath warmed her knuckles. I am helping something hurt. That night, Molly learned the cottage had opinions. The porch light turned on by itself when Bramble stepped outside. The kettle began to whistle before she touched the stove. The old floorboards under the kitchen table warmed beneath her bare feet, like something alive had rolled over in its sleep. Molly stood in the middle of the room holding a flashlight, a screwdriver, and the deep suspicion that her house had joined a royal conspiracy without asking her. I pay the mortgage here, she told the ceiling. If anyone is going to act haunted, it should be me. Bramble sat beside the stove, huge and black and freshly brushed, looking much too innocent for a wolf who had spent the afternoon stealing crackers from the pantry and pushing her phone off the counter every time she opened the pack emergency line. Molly pointed the screwdriver at him. You are not helping. His ears flicked. Yes, I know you understand me. You have been pretending not to all day, which is very rude for someone sleeping on my rug. He lowered his head onto his paws, but his gold eyes stayed on her. That was the problem. Every time he looked at her, the strange pull in her chest tightened. Not painful exactly. More like hearing her name called from another room by someone she had not met yet, but somehow missed. She hated that. Molly Whitcomb liked clean labels. Fever. Sprain. Anxiety. Bad attitude. This did not fit on a label. She crouched near the loose plank under the kitchen table, where the warmth was strongest. Her mother had always told her not to pry at old wood unless she was ready for old secrets. Her mother had also hidden tax papers in a flour tin and once kept a raccoon in the bathtub for 3 days, so advice in the Whitcomb family had always arrived with footnotes. The plank lifted with a tired creak. Under it sat a flat metal box wrapped in oilcloth. Molly stopped breathing. Bramble rose so quickly the quilt slid off his back. Easy, she whispered, though she was not sure which of them needed it more. Inside the box was a leather ledger, a faded photograph of Molly's mother standing beside Crown Hall, and a silver pin shaped like a black crown split by a thin line. Molly touched the page. Her gift stirred through the dust. The handwriting was her mother's. Crown mate recognition is not romance first. It is witness first. When an alpha king is severed from his wolf, the bond may call to the one person who can tell the difference between power and pain. Molly read the sentence twice. Her throat went tight. No, she said softly. Absolutely not. Bramble took one step toward her. The floorboards warmed again. Do not look at me like that. Her voice cracked, which annoyed her more than the magic. I am a cottage omega with a busted truck and a mailbox that leans left. I am not a witness for a missing king. Bramble stopped. He did not push closer. He simply lowered himself to the floor, leaving 6 feet of space between them, and rested his chin on his paws like he was giving her room to choose. That gentleness hurt worse than pressure would have. Molly turned the page. A memory snapped through her fingers, bright and cold. Crown Hall. Black marble. Dorian Blackridge on one knee, not bowing, fighting to breathe through a spell wrapped around his wolf. Silas Crow stood over him, calm as Sunday church, and said, "The pack needs a king it can control." Molly gasped and dropped the ledger. Bramble was beside her in an instant, not touching, just there. She stared at him, at the royal mark hidden beneath the cloth on his neck, at the impossible grief in his gold eyes. "He did this to you," she whispered. Outside, tires crunched on the gravel road. Headlights swept across the cottage wall. Bramble moved between Molly and the door before the first knock came. The knock came again, polite enough to be insulting. Molly stood in the kitchen with her mother's ledger open on the table, one hand still cold from the memory, while Bramble planted himself in front of the door like a black wall with a heartbeat. Outside, more headlights rolled over the windows. Not one truck. 3, maybe 4. The kind of convoy that said the pack had stopped asking and started deciding. Molly swallowed hard and reached for the nearest weapon, which happened to be a cast-iron skillet. Bramble glanced back at it. "Do not judge me," she whispered. "You are the one hiding in my house." A man's voice came through the door, smooth and patient. "Miss Whitcomb, I am Silas Crow, acting regent of Blackridge Crown Pack. I believe you have something that belongs to the throne." Molly's fingers tightened around the skillet handle. Bramble went so still the whole cottage seemed to hold its breath. "That is funny," Molly called back. "Most men start with good evening." A pause, then a soft laugh. "Good evening." The way he said it made the words feel freshly washed and still dirty. Molly opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. Silas Crow stood on her porch in a black wool coat that probably cost more than her truck. He was pale, handsome in a careful way, with silver blonde hair brushed back and eyes that never landed anywhere without measuring what it was worth. Behind him stood 4 royal guards and Deputy Marin Pike, whose face looked tight enough to crack. Marin did not meet Molly's eyes at first. That told Molly almost everything. Silas smiled. "You have had a difficult few days. I have had a wet wolf, a cracked mug, and a stranger on my porch after dark. Difficult is still applying for the job." His gaze slid past her shoulder. Bramble had moved out of direct sight, but the air behind Molly was heavy with him. "A black wolf was seen entering this property," Silas said. "Under emergency authority from the high table, all unidentified wolves must be surrendered for inspection." He lifted a folded document sealed in black wax. Molly felt the maple twist hard in her ribs. The wax carried the same silver-cold feeling as the mark on Bramble's shoulder. Her gift did not need water this time. The paper itself felt wrong. "Inspection," she repeated. "That is a gentle word for a lot of armed men." Silas tilted his head. "You are an Omega alone on the edge of pack territory. I am offering protection." Bramble made a sound from the shadows, low and furious. The porch boards trembled. Every guard reached for something at his belt. Molly stepped sideways, blocking the gap with her own body before anyone could see him clearly. It was ridiculous. She was 5'4" in wool socks, holding cookware. Still, Bramble stopped. Not because Silas ordered him, because she had moved. Silas noticed. His smile thinned. "Careful, Miss Whitcomb. Loyalty to a dangerous animal can be misunderstood." Molly looked at Marin then. "Is that what this is? A misunderstanding?" Marin's jaw worked. "Molly, just let us check the shed." No, Silas's eyes sharpened. The nice man mask did not fall. It simply forgot to breathe. The king is missing. Rogue activity is rising. The pack cannot afford sentiment. Then the pack should stop spending so much on intimidation. One guard coughed into his glove. Marin looked at the porch rail like it had become fascinating. Silas stepped closer to the chain. His voice lowered. "You do not understand what you are standing in front of." Molly felt Bramble behind her, massive and silent, the heat of him filling the doorway. She thought of the memory in Crown Hall. Dorian on one knee. Silas saying the pack needed a king it could control. Fear moved through her, clean and sharp. But under it was something warmer. Anger, maybe. Or the beginning of courage with bad timing. "You are right," Molly said. "I usually stand behind things. Counters. Feed bags. People with better dental insurance. But tonight, I am standing here." Silas's expression went cold. Then he looked past her into the dark cottage and spoke one word, quiet as a blade sliding free. "Dorian." The name hit the room like thunder. The lights flickered. Bramble stepped into view, gold eyes burning, royal mark half hidden beneath Molly's crooked bandage. Every guard froze. Molly stopped breathing. Silas smiled at the wolf and bowed just enough to mock him. "Your Majesty," he said. "There you are." For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The guards stared at the giant black wolf in Molly Whitcomb's doorway. Silas Crow smiled like a man watching a lock turn, and Molly stood there in wool socks with a skillet in her hand, wondering if there was a polite way to ask a royal conspiracy to leave before it tracked mud through her kitchen. Then Bramble changed. It was not the violent nightmare stories people told children to keep them from wandering near pack borders. It was quieter than that, stranger, like moonlight folding itself into bone and shadow. The black wolf lowered his head, the air bent around him, and in the space between one breath and the next, a man stood behind Molly wrapped in one of her old gray quilts. He was tall, barefooted, damp-haired, and still carrying the gold-eyed stare of the wolf. The quilt had little blue ducks on it. Molly noticed this because fear did odd things to a person. So did royalty in bird-patterned bedding. Silas bowed deeper now, though every inch of it was an insult. "Alpha King Dorian Blackridge," he said. "The high table will be relieved." Dorian's voice came rough, like it had been dragged over stone before reaching his mouth. "The high table knows exactly where I have been." The guard shifted. Deputy Marin Pike finally looked at Molly, and there was real fear in her face now, not of Dorian, but of what Silas had brought to her porch. Silas spread his hands. "You were found in the home of an unregistered Omega, unable to maintain human form, hidden from lawful pack authority. I am trying to help you before your enemies use this." "My enemies," Dorian said, "are standing on her porch." The mate pull hit Molly so hard she almost stepped back. Not because he sounded powerful, because he sounded tired. Under all that alpha command was exhaustion, betrayal, and the kind of loneliness that did not ask for comfort because it had forgotten comfort was allowed. Silas's eyes flicked to Molly. "Miss Whitcomb, you are clearly overwhelmed. Step aside, and no one will blame you for poor judgment." That should have worked. Molly had spent most of her life being expected to step aside. In grocery lines, at pack meetings, at the clinic when ranked wolves wanted their dogs seen first. But Dorian's hand brushed the back of the chair beside him, not reaching for her, not using her, just steadying himself because the spell was still eating at his strength. Molly lifted the skillet a little higher. "I am having an unusually educational week," she said. "But my judgment is doing fine." Silas's smile disappeared. "You have no idea what he is." Molly turned her head just enough to look at Dorian. The king looked furious, embarrassed, and one bad breeze away from losing the duck quilt. "I know he hates lavender soap," she said. "I know he steals biscuits. I know someone put silver binder magic on him and called it law." Dorian's jaw tightened. Silas went still. There it was. The crack in the perfect mask. Marin saw it too. Dorian leaned closer to Molly, voice low enough that only she could hear. "If I walk out with him, I may never get back to myself." Molly swallowed. "Then do not walk out with him. He will come back with more men. Then we should probably stop discussing treason on the porch." For the first time, something almost like amusement moved through Dorian's face. Small, brief, gone before it could be trusted. Molly stepped back and shut the door in Silas Crow's face. The chain rattled. The cottage went silent. Outside, Silas said, very softly, "That was unwise." Molly locked the deadbolt, turned to the Alpha King dripping on her floor, and handed him a chipped mug of tea. "Your Majesty," she said, "start talking before you ruin another rug." Dorian Blackridge took the chipped mug like it was a peace treaty written by a very confused committee. He sat at Molly's kitchen table in the gray duck quilt, shoulders too broad for her smallest chair, royal posture fighting a losing war against exhaustion. Outside, Silas Crow's convoy waited on the gravel road with its headlights pointed at the cottage like accusation. Inside, the only sounds were rain, the stove ticking, and Molly's old refrigerator humming as if it had survived worse kings than this one. 3 weeks ago, Dorian said, staring into the tea, Silas asked the high table for emergency authority. He said my wolf had become unstable. Molly leaned against the counter with the skillet still in one hand. Had it? His mouth tightened. No, that was not a long answer. It was the safest one. She gave him a look. Your Majesty, I just shut my door on the acting regent and 4 armed guards while wearing socks with pumpkins on them. We have left safe about 6 exits back. Something in his face shifted. Not a smile. Almost. Silas used a crown binding right during a leadership review. It was supposed to test whether my wolf and I were aligned. Instead, it trapped me between forms. I escaped before they could parade me in front of the high table as proof I was unfit. Molly touched the ledger on the table and ended up in my blackberry bushes. Not my most strategic retreat. You were full of thorns and tried to intimidate a washtub. The tub was too small. You weigh about as much as my truck. Your truck is rusting. My truck has never stolen biscuits. Dorian looked down into the mug, and this time the almost smile stayed for half a second. It made him look less like a portrait on pack currency and more like a man who had forgotten what kitchens were for. Then the silver mark under his collarbone flashed faintly. He gripped the table until the wood creaked. Molly set the skillet down and stepped closer. Is it hurting you? It reacts when Silas is near. His voice went rough again. He must have anchored the right to his command. Molly hated how calm he sounded. Like pain was just another royal appointment to be managed before lunch. She took a bowl of clean water from the sink, dipped her fingers in, and touched the edge of the bandage at his shoulder. The mate pull answered instantly, warm and frightening. Under it, she felt the binder magic like ice under a creek. She also felt Dorian holding himself still so she would not be scared. That did something dangerous to her heart. We need Crown Hall, she said. The ledger says a witness can break the lie in front of the pack. Dorian looked up. No, that sounded royal. Try again like a person. If you stand as my witness, Silas will make you part of the inquiry. He will question your loyalty, your status, your bloodline, your right to speak. If the high table accepts the bond, they may claim you under crown protection. Molly went quiet. Claim me how? His eyes dropped. That was the answer before the words came. You could be ordered to leave this cottage and live under guard in Blackridge City until the succession question is settled. The room seemed to shrink. The warm floorboards, the crooked cabinets, her mother's chipped blue plates, the little house that had held every lonely, stubborn piece of her life. Molly pulled her hand back. You knew that before you asked me to help. Dorian closed his eyes. Yes. The betrayal was not loud. It did not need to be. It settled between them heavier than anger. Outside, one of the guards laughed at something, small and careless, and Molly suddenly wanted the whole pack system to trip over its own polished shoes. You should have told me first, she said. I was trying to protect you. No, you were trying to make the choice cleaner for yourself. He flinched, and that hurt too, because she had meant it. Molly grabbed her coat from the chair and wrapped the ledger in oilcloth. Dorian stood too fast, the duck quilt slipping off one shoulder. Molly, she pointed at him without turning around. Do not use the king voice in my kitchen. He stopped. The porch light flickered once, responding to both of them now. Molly opened the back door to the dark trail behind the cottage. I am going to Crown Hall because Silas hurt you, lied to the pack, and erased women like my mother from the record. But do not confuse that with forgiveness. Dorian nodded slowly, shame plain on his face. I will not. Molly stepped into the rain. Good. Then grab a real coat. If I am risking my house, my name, and possibly my entire life, you are not doing it in duck pajamas. The road to Blackridge City looked less like a royal return and more like the worst road trip Molly Whitcomb had ever taken with a man who technically owned several counties. Dorian drove her old truck because the steering pulled right, and he did not trust it. Molly sat in the passenger seat with her mother's ledger in her lap, a mason jar of bathwater under her boots, and the uncomfortable knowledge that the Alpha King looked almost normal in a borrowed flannel coat. Almost. Normal men did not make every gas station clerk lower their eyes by instinct. Normal men did not stare at passing pack patrol cars like he was memorizing where mercy had failed. At dawn they reached the Pine Hollow checkpoint, 6 miles from Crown Hall. Red and blue lights flashed across wet pavement. Silas had been waiting. Of course he has a checkpoint, Molly muttered. Men like him love folding tables. Dorian looked at the guards, then at the narrow road behind them. Stay in the truck. Molly turned slowly. Say that again if you want to walk to your own hearing. His jaw flexed. If they take you now, Silas controls the story before you ever speak. And if you go alone, he controls the room. Dorian did not answer fast enough. That was when she understood. He had already decided. The apology in his eyes arrived before the betrayal did. No, she said. Dorian, do not you dare make my choice smaller because yours feels heavy. His hand covered hers for 1 second on the gear shift. Warm. Careful. Gone too soon. I am not choosing for you. I am buying you time. Before she could stop him, he stepped out of the truck and lifted both hands where every guard could see. The air changed at once. Wolves along the checkpoint straightened, caught between their king and their orders. Silas walked forward in a charcoal coat, smiling like the morning belonged to him. Your Majesty, he called. How generous of you to return without forcing us to search every farmhouse in the county. Dorian looked back once. Not at the ledger. Not at the evidence. At Molly. Then Deputy Marin Pike opened the passenger door from the far side and whispered, Move now. Molly wanted to scream. Instead, she grabbed the jar, the ledger, and the ugly courage that had been ruining her week since the first knock on her door. Marin pulled her through a service ditch behind the checkpoint, while every eye stayed on Dorian. Behind them, Silas announced for the patrol cameras that the missing king had surrendered voluntarily for emergency review. Molly heard Dorian's voice answer, calm and cold. I have not surrendered anything. It should have comforted her. It did not. By noon, Crown Hall was packed. Marin got Molly into the old records wing through a staff entrance that smelled like dust, copier toner, and expensive lies. On every internal screen, the public inquiry had begun. Dorian stood alone on black marble, while the high table sat above him in a curved row of polished seats. Silas spoke first. The Alpha King returned without a witness, without stable form, and without explanation. The room murmured. Dorian did not use command. He did not growl. He stood there and took it, because one show of power would hand Silas the knife. Molly watched from the records room, with her nails biting into the ledger cover. He left me behind again, she whispered. Marin, already sorting through sealed boxes, said, maybe. Or maybe he finally trusted you to come in your own way. Molly hated that this helped. Then she opened a box marked Witness Records, 1987 to 2004, and found her mother's name cut out of every page with a razor-straight blade. Under the stack lay a silver charm shaped like a black crown, stained with the same cold magic as the binder. Molly picked it up, and the jar of bathwater at her feet turned bright as moonlit ice. On the screen, Silas raised his hand to call for Dorian's removal. Molly closed her fingers around the charm. Not yet, she said, and started running toward Crown Hall. The doors of Crown Hall opened hard enough to make every elder turn. Molly Whitcomb ran in wearing muddy boots, a rain-damp coat, and the expression of a woman who had passed 3 security desks, 1 marble staircase, and a very offended receptionist without permission. The mason jar in her hand glowed silver white. Her mother's ledger was tucked under one arm. Behind her, Deputy Marin Pike stepped into the hall and locked the doors with a calm click that sounded, somehow, more threatening than shouting. Silas Crow lowered his raised hand. Miss Whitcomb, he said, smooth as fresh paint over rot. This is a closed royal inquiry. Molly stopped in the center aisle, breathing hard. Then you should have locked the back hallway better. A ripple moved through the room. Ranked wolves stared from the lower benches. Noble families whispered behind gloved hands. The high table looked down at Molly like she was a coffee stain on a state document. Dorian stood alone on the black marble below them, pale but steady, his eyes finding her with a flash of relief so raw it nearly broke her anger in half. He took 1 step toward her. Molly lifted a finger. No, you stay there. The room went silent. Someone in the back made a tiny sound of disbelief. No one told the Alpha King to stay. Dorian stopped. Then, slowly, he stepped back. Not because he was weak, because he was listening. That landed harder than any command could have. Silas gave a soft laugh. Charming. But a cottage omega with a jar of dirty water cannot overturn pack law. Molly held up the jar. It is bathwater, actually. The silence changed shape. One elder blinked. Marin looked at the ceiling like she was praying for strength. Molly kept going. From the night, I found him trapped in wolf form. Water remembers contact. My mother knew that. So did yours. She pointed to the silver charm in her other hand. Silas's face did not move, but his scent sharpened, cold and metallic. Dorian felt it too. His jaw tightened. Molly opened the ledger and placed it on the evidence stand without asking permission. Crown mate recognition is not about romance first. It is about witness. Someone who can tell whether an alpha is losing control or being made to look like he is. Elder Haversham leaned forward. Your mother's name is not in the official witness record. Molly smiled, but there was no humor in it. That is because someone cut it out. She opened the folder Marin had found and spread the sliced pages across the stand. Clean blade. Same years. Same cases. Omega witnesses removed every time their testimony embarrassed someone important. The hall stirred. Silas stepped forward. This is sentimental theater. No, Dorian said. One word. Quiet. Final. He did not move in front of Molly. He did not steal the room from her. He only stood beside the truth and let it breathe. Molly uncapped the jar. Silver light spilled across the marble like moonlight poured from a kitchen shelf. The charm in her palm began to hum. In the water's surface, shapes formed. Crown Hall. Dorian on one knee. Silas pressing the charm to the binding circle. His voice rose from the jar, thin but clear. The pack needs a king it can control. No one whispered now. Silas lunged for the jar, but Dorian's wolf surfaced before he moved. Not wild. Not broken. Controlled. The enormous black wolf stepped out of Dorian's shadow like night choosing a shape, crossed the marble, and lowered his head beneath Molly's hand. The Alpha King's wolf chose his witness in front of the whole pack. Molly's knees almost gave out from the force of the bond, but she stayed upright. Silas tried one last command. The charm flared cold in Molly's hand. Pain flashed up her arm, sharp but brief, like grabbing winter itself. Dorian growled her name, terrified. Molly clenched the charm tighter and said, "You do not get to use his wolf against him anymore." The silver light shattered into harmless sparks. The jar went clear. The royal brand on Dorian's neck darkened, then healed into a clean black crown. Silas stumbled back, suddenly just a man in an expensive coat with no story left to hide behind. Molly looked up at the high table. "Now," she said, voice shaking but loud enough for every screen in Blackridge territory. "Would anyone else like to explain why my mother was erased?" For a long moment after Molly spoke, Crown Hall forgot how to breathe. The high tables sat above her with their polished pins and old names. But for the first time all morning, they looked less like history and more like people who had been caught moving furniture to hide a stain. Dorian stood beside his wolf, one hand still half lifted toward Molly, as if every instinct in him wanted to pull her away from the room that had hurt her. He did not. That was the first promise he kept in public. Elder Haversham cleared his throat. "The matter of erased witnesses will require review." Molly laughed once, small and tired. That is what powerful people say when they are hoping the truth gets bored and leaves. A few wolves in the lower benches lowered their eyes, not in submission, but shame. Deputy Marin placed the cut records on the evidence stand, one by one. Names. Dates. Omega witnesses removed from pack history because their truth had been inconvenient. Molly found her mother's name on a loose backing sheet, pressed so deep into the paper that the ink had left a ghost. Lillian Whitcomb, witness to the crown. Molly touched it with 2 fingers. Her voice softened. She was not nobody. Dorian turned to the high table. His presence filled the hall, but it did not crush it. That mattered. No Omega in Blackridge territory will be unnamed from public record again. No witness will be dismissed by rank. Silas Crow is stripped of Regency authority, and every emergency order signed under his hand is suspended until reviewed by a mixed council. Elder Haversham stiffened. "Your Majesty, tradition requires." Dorian looked at him. Not with rage. With something colder and cleaner. Tradition does not get to wear loyalty as a mask. Silas was taken from the hall without drama, which somehow made it worse for him. No grand speech. No noble exit. Just a man walking past the people he had lied to, while no one reached for his sleeve. Justice, Molly realized, was not always thunder. Sometimes it was silence where applause used to be. 3 weeks later, Dorian came back to her cottage without guards, cameras, or a royal announcement. Molly was fixing the blackberry fence when his black truck rolled up the gravel drive. He stepped out in jeans, work boots, and a coat that probably still cost too much. In one hand, he carried lavender soap. In the other, a paper bag from the bakery in town. Molly leaned on the fence post. "If that is an apology, it smells suspiciously like cinnamon rolls. It is an apology with evidence. Better than the high table." He walked closer, careful to stop on the other side of the broken rail. "I am sorry I decided what safety meant for you without asking. I am sorry I thought being king gave me the right to carry the hard parts alone. It did not protect you. It only left you standing outside a choice that belonged to you." Molly looked at him for a long time. The bond between them was quiet now. Not a leash. Not a command. A path, waiting for both feet. I am still angry, she said. You should be. And the fence is still broken. Dorian took off his coat and rolled up his sleeves. Then I will start there. By sunset, the fence stood straighter than it had in years. Molly's cottage glowed warm behind them. Inside, Dorian's wolf had claimed the rug again and was pretending not to watch the biscuits cooling on the counter. Molly caught him anyway. Bramble, she warned. The alpha king of Blackridge Crown Pack, restored to his throne and burdened with 300 years of duty, sighed like one more biscuit might finally end him. Molly smiled. Not because everything was fixed. It was not. The records still had to be rewritten. The council still had to learn humility without choking on it. Dorian still had to choose, every day, whether power would make him smaller or more responsible. But her mother's name was back in Crown Hall. Omega witnesses had seats now, and when the king stood before the pack, he no longer called loyalty silence. He called it telling the truth, even when the truth arrived muddy, angry, and holding bathwater in a mason jar. Years later, people would argue about when Blackridge changed. Some said it began at the inquiry. Some said it began when Dorian reclaimed the crown. Molly knew better. It began on a rainy night at a crooked cottage, when a wounded king was treated like a creature worth washing, and an overlooked Omega learned that dignity was not something a throne could grant. It was something she had carried in with the towels.